There is a whole lot of cinema to be discovered. You just have to overcome that 1-inch barrier known as subtitles. This is that 1-inch barrier. I am Nicola Barry here with Josh Barry, Kieran Griffiths. Gentlemen, welcome back to another fun-filled, or what could be a fun-filled episode of the show. How are we?
Good.
Doing well?
Yeah.
Rounded out Bong Joon-ho
Yes,
quite strongly.
nicely.
Big episode of with Stalker being one of our most listened to and watched episodes so far. So thank you for your support on that. But, you know, we exercised our brains a fair bit with Stalker. Lots of existential chats about, you know, what is life and what's the purpose of living and is God real? Today we're taking the hardest detour in any direction. It doesn't matter which way we went because we somehow landed on the French film Mandibles, and by somehow I chose it.
Yeah, that's right.
Whether it was the antithesis to a 2.5-hour film by me picking.
I think when I saw you pick it, I was like, it's definitely.
It was, you know, like, because we watch a lot of movies just outside of this podcast as well. So sometimes if you do a 2-hour and 45-ish minute film, however long Stalker was, sometimes you just want to take a bit of a break with a 77-minute irreverent French comedy from the master of, well, a master we may discuss, but an auteur of absurd comedy, Quentin Dupieux. But I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly.
But these really are the two sides of the art house cinema coin.
Yeah, this is
Right? Because when you think, I think if you talk to someone who doesn't, you know, really engage with films outside of entertainment and you ask them what is an art movie to you, they'll either say something like Stalker, this massively overlong, philosophical, existential, Russian 70s sci-fi, like that is art cinema. Or they'd say a 70-minute French comedy about a gigantic fly.
Yes, I mean, comedy is a word, absurdism is a word, but you're right, it's literally opposite ends of the art house spectrum, but all filling still on that spectrum of art house cinema, because
There's
this
definitely a spectrum involved, that's for sure.
We managed to tiptoe around a lot of things in other episodes. This one's going to be tough. But it's actually a French-Belgian co-production from Quentin Dupieux, who has probably since about 2015, 16, managed to make and release a film every year, even in this year, 2020, which was the COVID year, which was, you know, the year the world shut down. And the release of this film was consistently pushed back because there was actually a lot of anticipation leading into this film because of its constant pushing back. But he's, just a bit of background on Quentin, he kind of really came into his own with a movie called Rubber in 2010.
Was that his first?
No, it wasn't his first, but it was definitely one that propelled him into...
Yeah, there was a lot of talk
because it was
about
an
that.
English language film as well. So
Yeah.
he sort of cracked into the English language market there, and it's about a sentient tire that has the ability to blow people's heads up through psychic powers. Somehow
What can you
still
even say to that?
Somehow still not the weirdest film he's made. So he blew up with that, and he's done plenty of films since then. A noticeable one for me, or one that I really enjoyed, was Deerskin, about a man who will literally do anything for a jacket that he gets. He will kill people to get this jacket. But then we get something like Mandibles, which, as Kieran alluded to, is an irreverent comedy, which follows two simple-minded friends called Jean-Gabe and Manu, who Jean-Gabe is approached one day to do a crime for someone. He's sleeping on the beach. He's approached to do this thing, and he needs a car to do it. The first car he just happens to steal and pick up his friend. They go on this road trip to do this job together. Happens to have a giant fly in its boot.
Yeah, we're talking like dog size.
We're talking dog
Yeah,
size.
it's like a fly the size of a Labrador.
That is living in the boot of this, just happens to be this car that they steal to do the job. And then rather than completing the job, the two friends decide that they could probably make money off of this fly somehow. The ideas they have, maybe not so much transferring into to monetary gain, but they come across a group of people, of activists, and yes, things go. I wouldn't even say sideways from there. It is just...
No, because sideways implies that it was upright at one point.
There's no way to describe what happens in this film without sounding like we've all stopped taking our medication. Like, that's, I think, the best way to describe Mandibles. But that is Quentin Dupieux's cinema in general, right?
Yeah.
Like, he is very irreverent. He does incredibly absurdist comedy. Sometimes his films have something to say. I think about something like Smoking Causes Coughing. I don't know if you guys saw that a few years ago, which is his take on like the superhero film. But yeah, he definitely strikes me as a filmmaker out of the films that I've seen where he just has an idea and just goes, can I turn this into a 70 to 80 minute movie? And he's the master of that. None of his movies have gone over 2 hours, I believe.
Wow.
He usually does this 70 to
Unlike Martin
90 minutes.
Scorsese, who's never had a film under 3 hours.
So Quentin Dupieux, I'm going to keep butchering that accidentally, but like Dupieux. How much of his filmography had you seen going? Because Mandibles was a first time watch for all of us.
Yeah. I've seen Rubber.
Yeah.
And I've seen Deerskin.
Deerskin.
This was my first of his films. I mean, I was familiar with Rubber, and I knew that it was, pretty out there, pretty weird. I mean, just based on that synopsis of this, it's a horror film about a sentient tire that murders people, right? It's like, okay, that dude's making some weird stuff.
Yeah.
But I'd never seen any of his films, and like that kind of irreverent comedy isn't really my preferred kind of film. If I'm going to watch a comedy, it's probably not something quite this absurd.
Right. And I would say the same for me as well.
Yeah.
And
Rubber, apologies in advance.
Rubber, I didn't enjoy. Like I guess it's cool to see something so wacky, but Deerskin was.
I really liked Deerskin. Yeah,
and I think probably. I mean, I've only seen those two, but I feel like the most accessible one. It's not
probably
it's not fully absurdist.
He did do one that I saw at Sydney Film Fest a few years ago called Anything But True. I'll look it up later, but it's ultimately the story is these two people buy a house and there is a ladder that goes down into nowhere seemingly, and every time they go down the ladder they get younger and younger. They end up back in the house, so it becomes about the chase of eternal youth and stuff and the costs of that. But arguably even just as accessible as Deerskin. Not like Mandibles really, but it's funny we say that though, like how like irreverent, I like irreverent comedy. I'm a big fan, like in more of a Western way. I love like things like the Eric Andre Show and Tim and Eric, these things that are just super weird for the sake of being weird, because I think I like comedy that does make people feel uncomfortable. I think as weird as it sounds, as sadistic as it sounds, I like watching people get uncomfortable with certain comedy.
Yeah.
And I would put Quentin Dupieux in that thing. And it sort of resonates with some people because it's currently sitting on 92% on Rotten Tomatoes with an average score of 7.4.
Yeah.
So it's quite high for this kind of film.
Yeah, even Metacritic,
62 reviews.
Yeah, so Metacritic's quite high as well.
It's quite high. I definitely feel like this is a movie that critics are watching probably more than general audiences.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, it premiered at Cannes, didn't it?
Yeah, it did again. Premiered at Cannes, right?
Oh, sorry, Venice.
Venice, and then it went to Telluride as well. So it did the film festival circuit in 2020 when the world was kind of shut down, and then actually came out in 2021 in French cinemas. Budget, I believe this is US, $4.8 million and made $2 million at the box office, but obviously COVID, yeah, and there'll be other films we talk about.
I don't know whether it would have made much more in a normal year.
No, I would agree.
But you can give it a bit of leeway. I can't take credit for this because I did see it in a review that I was reading of the film after watching it, but I think it's probably, for general audiences, the best description of the film you could have, and that is it's Dumb and Dumber meets E.T.
That is actually, that's a great way of putting it, yeah.
Well, I read that's how he pitched the film.
That might have been where I read it, yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Because, and we were talking earlier, you watched an interview with Quentin Dupieux, and I was like, does he seem like a weird guy? And you're like, no.
No, he doesn't seem overly weird.
Well, he's also a DJ as well.
He is a DJ.
He's released several albums under the name, is it Mr. Oizo?
Mr. Oizo.
Yeah. So he's a pretty obviously talented guy, but pretty out there dude, doing a lot of different things. Yeah. And while it seems like those kind of weird, irreverent, absurd comedies are definitely his comfort area.
Sure.
He's very much an auteur and an artist in the way that he has his own style, and he goes, I've got this idea, I'm going to make this thing.
Yeah.
And he flexes that artistic muscle. Like, let's look at this. He's the director, the writer. He produces, he did the cinematography, he does the editing. Like, he is very much in, and that's probably why he can do such a low budget, reasonably low budget. This is a almost $5 million budget movie, which is
similar to another friend of the show in Xavier Dolan.
Yeah, exactly. He very much has that creative, artistic control over his film and has had enough success, especially in French cinema, that the fact that he's been able to do one of these a year for the last almost decade to much success. You know what I mean? Like I think Smoking Causes Coughing was one of his highest grossing films. Like, you know, and that came out in 2022, I believe. So he obviously strikes a chord, especially in French cinema, with that irreverent sort of comedy. So it's interesting to watch someone who, has this much artistic passion behind his projects kind of be semi-normal. Like just a guy who's who just woke up one day and is like, I don't have much to say, but I will make a movie about a fly in my boot. A giant dog-sized fly. Yeah. But, I mean, and he manages to get people, he does use recurring cast members, but the biggest pull, I guess, for this one is Adele Extrapolis, who I believe I'm pronouncing correctly, who many people will probably know from Blue is the Warmest Color. That was sort of her breakout role. She's done English and French language films since. But she is part of this group that the two bozos run into later in the film. And
they are, like, the Dumb and Dumber comparison is so apt. Like, these guys are so incredibly stupid.
Yeah. Every decision they make is just baffling.
I mean, I got instant reaction to everything. There's no thought to anything they do.
Yeah. No. I got Bill and Ted. Like as I was watching it, I was
especially
thinking,
with they have this little handshake that they do.
I think that's what it was actually.
Yeah, because obviously Bill and Ted, it's the dude excellent thing. Yeah. Whereas so they've got this little handshake where they'll do the horns, bull and Toro.
Yeah. And then in that interview, I saw him mention more Wayne's World.
This was like especially like the road trippy elements sort of
all these 90s sort of comedy duos. When that was like it was like the post buddy cop film. Like that's the 80s was very much the buddy cop, the opposites attracts. Like what if we put the two dumb people together and sort of get some humor out of that?
Beavis and Butthead.
Yeah. They made such a great comeback in the last few years. There's some pretty funny episodes of Beavis and Butthead out there. In fairness, like for what these two actors do, so we've got David Massey, who's playing Jean Gabe, and Gregory Ludwig, who's playing Manu. And for what they are given character-wise, script-wise, they're good. I don't think anyone's going to turn around and go like that's as iconic as Dumb and Dumber or Bill and Ted because their chemistry doesn't need that. They don't need to sort of. They just work. They work well together. They're dim-witted. They have a run-in very early on with someone at who's sleeping in a camper van, where something disastrous, I guess you could say, happens. And to me, that was the point of the film where I've gone like, these two guys are fine. Like they're doing exactly what they need to do to get the point across that these are just very dim-witted guys who are going to spend the next hour of the film making incredibly dumb decisions. And you kind of fall into a fail-safe with that. I feel like whether it's intentional or not, there was almost like for a movie that is so irreverently funny, I guess in quotation marks, depending on what your sense of humor is. To me, there was never a point where I was really excited to see what these guys did next. I was just more obsessed with what's this fly going to do. And I think the film makes a great decision by going to this group of like early 20s, very like outwardly opinionated, holier than thou people, put them in that situation. So I think the film did a great job of doing that. But they're fine, like these two guys. Yeah. It's the one performance we have to talk about.
The elephant in the room.
The elephant in the room. Adele Extrapolis, who I didn't find out till after the film because when let's just say she bursts onto the screen very vividly. There's you cannot miss this performance. There's On the Nose, and then there's this.
There's the nose itself.
There's the nose. You are the nose. And this character that she plays, Agnes, I found out after the fact watching the movie, is slightly based on Greta Thunberg, who, if you don't know who Greta Thunberg is, she is the how dare you girl, the one who, like 15, 14-year-old climate activist who was speaking out at UN things about, how the Western world especially, was treating climate change and stuff, and she's become a very outwardly political activist, but is also on the autism spectrum. So this character of Agnes is kind of directly based on Greta Thunberg and is not just outwardly environmental and sort of an activist in her own right, but is autistic, and not in a way that you would expect an irreverent comedy, well, maybe you would expect an irreverent comedy film to portray autism.
But they explain that
Yes.
at some point, sort of prior to the film, she was in some kind of, is it a skiing accident?
Skiing accident. She's had a head injury, right?
Where she woke up from a coma and she could only talk by yelling.
Yes.
You know, so we get introduced to her, but she's serving dinner. And she sort of walks in with the plate and announces by yelling what's for dinner and be like, you know, yelling, I hope you enjoy it.
And it's very matter of fact. Like there's a cadence and tone to her dialogue that is not just like, you know, if you would walk in and just be like, hey guys, we're having this for dinner and she is just going, this is for dinner, I hope you enjoy it. Like it's very to the point.
Yeah.
Much in the same way that if you do have a conversation with someone who has Asperger's or autism on the spectrum, there's sort of that, there's no fluffing around. They will say what's on their mind. And that's exactly what we sort of get with Agnes as a character.
Yeah.
But it's the portrayal of it more so, which is this is tough to sort of talk about in the sense of like, is this an offensive portrayal of someone who has?
Because I mean, we've watched quite a few films that feature characters with you know, mental disabilities or impairments.
The Bong Joon-ho month, like he's very heavily prominent in his films, right?
And I think most of what we've watched has handled it really respectfully, and I think the actors have portrayed it very well.
And almost has a big like part to do with the plot, like especially when you look at something like Memories of Murder, the fact that they were looking at people who have mental disabilities before even considering anything else was more of a reflection on the police that time we spoke about in the episode. You get something like this.
This is the other end. It's uncomfortable. Like you feel awkward watching it, and I think the character in and of itself is potentially fine. You know, it's maybe bordering on offensive, but who are we to say? And I think it's mostly fine. I think for Quentin Dupieux to come out and go, oh yeah, it's sort of, you know, half a reference to Greta Thunberg. It's like, are you really going to get to the point where we're sort of mocking a teenage girl who's autistic and is out there trying to, you know, make the world a better place? That's a weird hill to die on, man. Like, you know, I know the French love dying on weird hills, but this is a particular. I'm English.
It's no, it's a good point though. That's the thing. I think you're right. If he hadn't have come out and blatantly said like, oh no, this is my take on Greta Thunberg, it's you kind of, because I'll admit, it was that dinner scene where she comes out, I just went. I don't think I was expecting it.
No.
But then all of a sudden I've gone, oh God, I've just laughed at someone who has.
Yeah.
But is that what the film's trying to get me to do? And that it's
I think
such a conflicting experience.
It is over the top.
That's so. It's funny that like when we think about something that is so absurd like this film, which by the way, again, is the whole plot is around how these dimwits can make money off a fly in the boot of their car.
Yeah.
You kind of go like, what? Do you still create your own boundaries of what is okay to laugh at and what is not okay to laugh at?
I think it's punching down, right? Like we talk about like stand-up comedians all the time and why certain people and certain things are okay to joke about. And I think it's punching up is one thing and punching down is another. And I think that's why people have taken such umbrage with the likes of Ricky Gervais and Jimmy Carr over recent years, is because it's like, okay, you're insanely wealthy, privileged, straight white men, and you're still choosing to make jokes about pronouns. It's like, oh, real funny, guys. Like, you know. So I think when it's sort of mocking, you know, Greta Thunberg, it's like, yeah, that's not right. Like, I feel weird laughing at that.
Yeah.
I think if you have this character who is just, you know, a bit weird, that's fine. If they'd just been like, yep, she was in an accident, she was in a coma, and now she wakes up and she yells at everything.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's funny. That's just weird. But I think when you associate it with those connotations, that's when it starts to get problematic, I think.
It's interesting because it's sort of that like, I wonder how, it's interesting that because I obviously didn't find out about the Greta Thunberg connection until after the film.
No,
but I still felt uncomfortable before that. There was something about it and I didn't know whether it was how Quentin Dupieux has written the character or how Adele is playing the character that I was struggling with. Yeah. And this is saying a lot because I laugh at most things. Like I'm very, because I'll even admittedly, I'm a Ricky Gervais, Jimmy Carr fan. I like their comedy. But it's funny when we sort of can go like, we all have our sensibilities of what we find funny and what we will accept and boundaries and stuff. But there was a point in this film where I kind of went, oh, I don't think this, and this is as a fan of Quentin Dupieux's films, I kind of went like, is this a fucking big miss?
Yeah,
it just feels like a weird choice.
It does. It really does. But I don't know whether
I just didn't find it funny, and I also then didn't really see the point of it in the story.
That's, I think, one of the biggest issues.
Then
I
I'm
have.
like, well,
there's no real payoff with
No.
that particular aspect of a character. So it does just feel like mocking for the sake of
even,
mocking.
even at the point, just going a little bit further ahead in the story, and look, there's not much to spoil with this film, but they are hiding, these two guys are hiding the fly because they're scared that these four people that they've met will also get the idea that they're going to make money off the fly. So they're just trying to hide their, for lack of a better phrase, cash cow away from them. But the fly gets out of the booth and they're keeping it in the room, and Agnes finds it, and her reaction is like, she thinks it's a dog initially, and they keep talking about this small dog that's in the room because it's the size of a small...
And to backtrack a little bit, the people's house that they find themselves in, they come across this group of young, girls in their early 20s, and the sort of, leader of this group of friends mistakes who is it, Jean Gab, for one of her old high school friends.
That's right, yes.
So he just goes along with it. He keeps being like, oh no, I'm not the person you think I am. But she's like, no, we went to school together. And then we're going to a party at my house.
Which I will admit has a brilliant payoff at the end of it. That has a great payoff. Yes.
So they go back to her house, and she's, obviously very wealthy. Like, it's this big villa with a swimming pool and, a fridge full of food, and the two idiots haven't eaten anything because they spent all of their money on dog food, I think it is, to try and they're trying to train the fly using like dog treats and stuff.
We've skipped over a lot of that talking about Adele, but like there are some really funny moments of them trying to train this fly, which is just fucking dormant.
It's just ridiculous, the whole thing. So they're in this house, and apparently the parents of the girl don't like animals in the house. So when Agnes thinks that there is a dog in the house, she runs off to is it Cecile?
Cecile, who's the girl's house,
and goes, these two idiots that you brought into your house, they've got a dog in there.
Because Agnes immediately doesn't like them as well.
She knows that something's
wrong.
She doesn't know that he's not who they think he is, but she's just like, there's something wrong with these two guys. And so she goes and says, there's a dog in the house, we need to go and look in there. The two idiots manage to find a dog.
Yes,
from like the neighbor's
pretty
property.
Pretty quickly, yeah.
Go and put it in the room and hide the fly to be like, oh yeah, we did have a dog in here, sorry. And Cecile's like, oh, it's fine, the dog's really cute. Like, shut up, Agnes, you're making everything uncomfortable for everyone, including the viewers. And then we get, I think, probably one of the funniest moments in the film. In which the fly and the dog get left alone in a room together. And the large dog-sized fly eats the little dog.
Which is funny. It is gold.
Which Agnes then finds
the collar or the lead or something.
But she finds the fly.
She finds the fly.
And she can't. She's so gobsmacked by the sight of this giant fly, as you would be if you're not, Jean Gab and Manu, who see the giant fly and whose instant reaction is, we can make money with this.
We can train it.
We can train it. We can start a giant fly circus.
Holy shit.
No, we can get it to rob banks.
We can rob banks at the beginning,
trains to rob banks. And they all come in, they don't see the fly, they just see Agnes standing there and the dog collar and sort of bits of dog on the floor. And they assume that Agnes ate the dog.
So now we're starting to get into the territory of like, is that the only reason they've written her as a character on the spectrum as well? Is so people who are in the film will immediately assume that because she's on the spectrum,
because she's a bit
slightly
weird,
different,
that she's gonna eat a dog. Because she was
Which,
so
if
annoyed with the two guys.
If you've seen Quentin Dupieux's other films, he doesn't shy away from making audiences uncomfortable. The fact that he has a sentient tire blowing people's heads up is just one example. But to me, that strikes back to our earlier points. If that's the only reason that character is on the spectrum, then that's also a quite weak excuse for me. And this isn't. We're not on the podium here. What do they call it? We're not here going like we're better than everyone. Like we're.
No, there's a high horse and we're on the lowest horse possible.
Oh, 100%. We haven't even made it onto the rungs of the horse yet. We're not even in the stable. But I think you get a gut feeling when you go something like, yeah, this doesn't make sense. And is definitely one of them, despite how ridiculous this plot is, which it is ridiculous.
But there are a few good payoffs. We talk about the dog getting eaten by the fly.
It's funny,
There's one with the mistaken identity.
Yep.
And
That was my favourite payoff. When that happens at the end, I thought that was,
and obviously the final scene as well.
Yes.
So there's a few good payoffs in there, and I think it does work as a comedy. I think if you can... It's one of those ones where it's like the film is about a giant fly, right?
Yes.
But the fly is so sort of secondary
to everything.
To everything else in terms of what these two guys are doing and just how dumb they are. So I think if you can get around the giant fly, there's actually a pretty funny, sort of Bill and Ted, Wayne's World, Dumb and Dumber-esque comedy here. Underneath all of that absurdity.
But it's like most, like comedy is just one of those genres as well where it is arguably for me the most subjective genre of films. That's the thing. If we listed what our favorite comedy films, we might have crossover, but I have a feeling they might be very different. You know what I mean?
But we've also talked about that before as well. Like just different countries.
Exactly. The fact that his films are so successful in France speaks a lot about this.
Well, even The Host, right, which we reviewed a few episodes ago, that is seen by a lot of people as a comedy. Whereas I think maybe that does get lost across sort of cultural and language barriers when we import it here. And maybe that is the same with Mandibles. Maybe French audiences watch that and think it's hilarious, and we watch it and we go, it's pretty weird.
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of comedy as well can be the voices of the actors, comedians, whereas we're reading the text.
Very true.
Yeah.
And something does get lost in translation.
Yeah.
Like when you can't understand the delivery and you're just reading it, you lose those things like the cadence and pronunciations and things like that. And voices and that sort of thing.
I mean, I don't have too much else to say about this. So it's a short movie, a short episode.
A short movie.
I think one thing I will criticize for it, and this is funny coming out of being a 77-minute film, once everything sort of wraps up at the house, we do have like an extra 15 minutes of film. Like I said, the final scene is hilarious. I think the way the movie ends is great.
Yeah, I do.
I don't know if I needed to go back and see what was going to happen next with these guys. I feel like the story, which is mostly contained within this house, was enough for me, even though that payoff at the end is great. So I don't know how you guys feel about that, but I mean, this is just me trying to shorten films every chance I get.
If it was up to Nick, they'd just be trailers. Imagine how many films you could watch in a day.
I'm just trying to look at some of his that nothing really goes over 90 minutes. So that's probably why I'm
But it's actually quite impressive how much they pack in.
There's actually a lot that
when
happens.
you think about the introduction and how we get to know the characters and finding the fly, the encounter that they have with this guy living in the middle of nowhere in a trailer, and then going to the house, and the house probably takes up a large chunk of the film, and then we sort of have the final act and everything wrapping up there. So what he manages to pack into a 77-minute film
is impressive. And still made me think could have been shorter. His shortest film that I can find is Yannick, which is 67 minutes long.
Wow.
Which I'll be watching next. No, my next pick. But I think
most episodes of HBO series. That's
That's it. Yeah, I saw episodes of Succession longer than this, right? But it's definitely, I think, in regards to other French comedies I've seen, which is probably actually not that many, to be totally honest, I do think that there is an irreverence that sort of comes out of Europe with styles of comedy as well. I think even if you look at a lot of German comedy films are quite more on the absurdist side, but we look at something like Delicatessen, which is, it is irreverent. It's very weird and intentionally weird. So I think that speaks a lot about
probably more visually in a way.
Well, it's funny you say that. I don't think Quentin Dupieux's films stand out very visually, but that's not what they're about. They're not trying to capture you in with these incredibly visually engaging things. But even something like just the plot of Delicatessen is this dystopian, absurdist, eating people like this very insane what if situation.
And that just gets weirder as it goes on as well.
Totally.
Once we start introducing this underground resistance movement, it's like, okay, now we're getting real weird.
Yes. Whereas something like this, I would just argue is that same sort of absurdism, just a bit more contained. Quentin just keeps his plots in one location with very minimal characters. And I think that is just a reflection of sort of what European comedy does, especially French comedy, but also what they're receptive to as well. Which is very different from Hollywood comedy, which is even very different from Australian and British comedy. You know what I mean? Like when we say Europe, I feel like British and Australian comedy is far more aligned in that dry, satirical sort of taking the piss out of everything sort of sense. Whereas I don't feel like Mandibles or Quentin Dupieux's movies are necessarily taking the piss out of anything. They're just going like, how weird is this?
This is absurd, yeah.
Look how weird this is.
Yeah.
Look at this thing. That's weird.
Yeah. It's really weird.
Josh told me earlier, like Quentin got the idea for this film because there was just a fly in his boot, and he just thought about it.
Caught in his boot for
like
a while,
small,
and
like
then
a
he didn't
normal
stop
size
thinking about it for 2 years. He said.
How
crazy is
in
that?
some ways, I wish my brain worked
Yeah,
like
I
that.
know.
Yes, for
And
You
then
know,
in
that
some
I
ways
saw a fly in my boot and went, what if that fly was the size of a dog?
And what if I tried to make money out of it?
Yeah.
And what if Greta Thunberg had something to do with it? You know, like that's.
Yeah, I think that more than anything says a lot about Quentin.
Yeah. But I mean, to elevator pitch it.
Yeah, have fun with this one.
You ever had a fly in your car?
Shout out a French comedy though, The Untouchables, which I'm sure will come up at some point.
The Untouchables is great.
I mean, it's comedy drama, isn't it?
yeah,
But,
that's definitely
But there's definitely, I remember laughing a lot in that
Laughing a
movie.
lot.
It's a
No.
very funny film. I mean,
Yeah.
The Untouchables is one of my favourite films.
Yeah.
It's
I
beautiful. It's a
absolutely
beautiful
love
film.
it.
Yeah.
But that
Did you
is
love
probably...
The Upside with Brian
I
Cranston
haven't
and
watched
Kevin
it.
Hart?
I can't
won't-
bring myself
no,
to
I
watch
can't either. I
I
can't
haven't
either.
seen it either.
But I think the fact that they remade it in
Yeah.
Hollywood
Yeah.
kind of shows that it is the closest
True.
thing to a sort of
100%.
standard Western. You know, obviously France is
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Hollywood,
but
Hollywood,
English-speaking
Yeah.
Hollywood film.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a lot more mainstream and a lot more approachable than something like a Mandibles. I couldn't see Mandibles being made in English.
No.
Because I just don't think that it would get funded. I don't think it would necessarily get the viewership.
It's funny because like when I think of absurdist American comedy, I think of like Tim and Eric. I think of Eric Andre. I think of Adult Swim,
Yeah.
and that's about it.
Yeah.
Unless you are doing like below independently financed films, like no one is making English language absurd comedy unless it's short form television.
It's YouTube skits.
YouTube skits, right?
Mandibles is in a lot of ways like a big budget
And
feature length YouTube skit.
But even still, the
Yeah.
ones that the YouTube skits like that I watch from Americans are still these very intelligent sort of things. They kind of have. I just discovered this guy Connor O'Malley the other day, and I'll have to show you this because like he does some weird shit, but it's very reflective of like a state. I don't think Mandibles is reflective of anything, and
I don't think
be,
it's
I could be
trying
wrong.
to say anything.
No, and that's kind of nice at the same time,
Yeah.
but at the same time, like you do finish it. Here's my elevator pitch. You do finish it, and you kind of go, "What was the point of that?" No, but look, I do think if you are looking for something that is, if you do like irreverent, absurd comedy, and you are looking for something that is fun to watch, that is breezy, that doesn't really need you to bring a lot to the table. It is fun. It is Dumb and Dumber meets E.T. It has this fun spirit to it that entertains you for 77 minutes. It's not that much of your time. But I do think it is very much approach it with an open comedic mind and just be ready to be slightly offended by the portrayal of autism, I guess. Like, it's, if you're ready with those, that's it. But I absolutely 100% do not think this movie's for everyone.
No.
And
No,
that
I
was
think
my
you can say-
test. For
I
you guys.
agree. I agree.
We've yet to find out if we've passed or failed, but
We all failed this one. After Stalker, we all failed this one.
I'd say that more than half of the films that we've watched for this show would fit into that not for everyone category. Because how many films are
Absolutely.
really for everyone?
You know, that's a great point.
know?
Twisters. That's it. And that's about it. That's for everyone.
But I think
like-
about even stuff that's like, you know, definitely on the more accessible end
Sure.
of the scale. In something
Yeah.
like All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah.
War movies aren't for everyone, and this is a pretty harrowing war film.
Yeah.
That's not going to be for everyone. You think about stuff like Et tu m'aimes tambien, you know, saucy Mexican coming-of-age dramas, not going to be for everyone.
But it was definitely for 3 people sitting in this
Pretty-
podcast right now.
For 98% of the population.
Yeah. It's,
No, but it's
most
interesting
listened
that,
to,
isn't it?
most
But
listened
it's-
to episode
Yeah.
by far.
But it's
horny
also,
bastards.
It's funny you say that as well because I feel like comedy is the one almost that has to be defended the most. You
Yeah.
can almost get away with being the war films. Like, you don't want to see people getting slaughtered for 2.5 hours. That's fine. But it's funny with comedy, you can be like, you're going to laugh your ass off for 77 minutes or you're going to stare at a screen for 77 minutes and have the worst time of your life. Because comedy, I think, is the one where the most risk almost has to be taken to actually press play.
I agree. It's
You know what I
definitely
mean?
the hardest. I mean, I think so.
I think if you look at the state of comedy these days as well, how much you see on sort of like, or how we consume comedy now is Facebook videos, Instagram Reels, TikToks, like people just doing short, relatable comedic content. There's not that many big swings, or people don't want to take a big swing on something that's not, you know, a Will Ferrell driven vehicle. And I love Step Brothers, I think is one of the best comedy films ever made, right? So you kind of go like, that's a lot about my comedic sensibilities. So comedy is one I feel like that gets has to get defended a lot, which is very interesting. But it's also the one where I'm not going to judge people for being like, I'm not watching Mandibles. I'm like, I get it. You don't want to watch the fly in the boot of the car movie. I get it. He eats a dog. I get it.
That's it. It is super subjective, and I think, as you were saying, you know, you talk about like the Will Ferrell kind of comedies, and I can't do those. I can't do like the Ben Stiller films. Like they just do nothing for me.
Yeah.
You know, I've tried watching, you know, Anchorman or Zoolander, and I have the worst time. But I think of things like The Nice Guys and In Bruges.
Sure.
Those are two of probably my favorite comedies.
They're hilarious.
But people probably wouldn't
Instantly think
comedy when they watch that. It's like, you know, In Bruges is about two hitmen hiding out in Bruges, and one of them is suicidal and depressed and actively trying to kill himself the entire movie. It's like, how is that a comedy? It's like, well, watch it. It's hilarious.
It's very funny,
So I think that's it. Like you said, comedy, probably more than any other genre, is super subjective.
Yeah, which makes chats like these interesting, to be honest. But let's go around the table. Let's see if you guys passed or failed my test of ratings. We'll start with Kieran.
Oh, goody.
Hey.
I could tell. You were itching to tell.
So I thought I was going to fall into that camp. Like, as soon as Nick talked about what we were watching and and what... You know, and what the synopsis of the film was and who made it. I went, this is going to be a painful 77 minutes. I'm going to have the worst fucking time with this. And you know what? I did. No, I actually didn't mind it.
Totally,
I think there was some really good payoffs with some jokes that kind of got set up, and then you know, you sort of got the laugh and the punchline 10 or 15 minutes later, or in the case of Mistaken Identity, that one pays off
end of the film,
you know, from the start of the film almost to the end. I think it spends probably too much time in its first act with sort of, like, I think you could almost get rid of all of that stuff
with the caravan and stuff. I agree.
The best part of the film is them in that house. That is where most of the laughs come from, and so I think that could have been a bigger bulk of the film. Overall, though, I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I expected.
Nice.
I would probably go and watch some of Quentin Dupieux's other stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, like Deerskin.
Yeah, watch Deerskin.
Deerskin and Smoking Causes Coughing is definitely what I think you would both enjoy,
So I'm going to go with a surprising 3.5.
Wow.
Whoa.
There we go.
Holy.
That's basically a 5 for Kieran. That's what I'm taking from that.
I was thinking that's a 5
Wow.
for me.
Josh, I expect a 7 now at this point. God damn.
Yeah, it is funny. We watched, because that particular week we had to watch Stalker and this.
Yes.
I remember saying to Susie, all right, I'm not looking forward to watching this one. She's like, oh, which one? And I'm like, well, it's not the Russian 2.5. Nearly 3 hour movie.
That says a lot, right?
It's
like I've got to watch 2 films, the nearly 3 hour Russian like
existential
odyssey, and the 70-minute French comedy, and you go, I'm not looking forward to one.
Am I banned from choosing movies on this podcast now? Is this what's happened?
I think because of
for
Rubber, I just
you had a preconceived notion coming in.
I did.
Sure.
Deerskin was fine, but and fairly enjoyable. But
I prefer Deerskin to this.
Yes, me too. But yeah, I mean, it probably wasn't as bad as I thought, because I mean, the giant fly thing, I'm like, what is
happening? And like Kieran said, it does take a while to get to the really good stuff.
It does.
For 77.
That's right. I would go 2.5 for this.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that the lowest score we've had on the show?
Yeah,
that is. I think we've had all positive.
Is.
There's been nothing under a 3.
No.
Which I think Barking Dogs Never Bite was a 3.
Yeah,
there you go.
Around 3.
This is now the worst episode of the show. I've offended Josh.
Well, now we all have
more
to try
so than
and
Agnes. Jesus.
We have to all actively try and find the first film to get a 1-star on the show.
Yeah, that's I trust me, I'll find it.
We'll see you all next month for a Serbian film.
Somehow I'd still find a way to give that a positive review.
Yeah.
Okay, 2.5.
I can't say I enjoyed it much.
Did you get any laughs out of it? Like any genuine...
Did I get any? I did like the ending.
Yeah.
I have to say I did like the ending.
The final shot, like
there
the
might have
final-
been
that
one.
final
I think I
30 seconds
maybe
great.
and I now can't remember which bit it was, but
Yeah.
maybe once I had a bit of a laugh at. But
Even the dog getting eaten didn't give you a little chuckle?
Maybe that was it.
Yeah, that might have
Maybe
been,
that
because that
was
is
it.
a pretty funny scene.
Yeah.
But other than that, I wasn't
Yeah.
chuckling at all, really.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
As a stark defender of Quentin Dupieux films,
Even Nick has his limits.
even I have my limits. And it's funny because I chose this one for two reasons. I hadn't seen it
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
wanted to see it.
Yeah.
But based on sort of its release and that anticipation, I was like, well, am I about to potentially watch 92% of Rotten Tomatoes, good Metacritic? I was like, am I about to watch maybe what is his best film? And I think going into that, similar to the preconceived notions going the other way, I may have had too high of an expectation of this, and I kind of walked away going like, oh, yeah, I would rather watch Deerskin and Incredible But True and Smoking Causes Coughing again.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go with 3,
Yeah.
actually. So
Wow.
Kieran's walked away with the highest score for this one.
You would
Very unexpected.
Yeah.
Which is super unexpected to me.
Yeah.
I thought I'm shocked with 2.5 a little bit, but I thought maybe it would have been a 3 or 2.5 from Kieran. But,
I thought it was going to be low.
And I thought it was as well. Like when you first pitched it,
Yeah.
I went, oh God, I'm going to hate this.
What
But
have I
I
done?
just,
Yeah.
I
So
got
interesting.
some
Didn't hate it.
genuine laughs out of there, and it's actively made me want to watch more of his
cool.
stuff.
But this-
and maybe that will reframe it. Maybe I'll go, okay, I actually like Smoking
These are
Causes
other-
Coughing
Yeah.
more. Maybe Mandibles
because
isn't
I
as good
feel
as
like
I thought.
his other films have a bit more of a point to them. This was probably the one where I watched where I was like, what is actually the point of this film? And it doesn't necessarily mean that all things have to have it. Sometimes things are just made for entertainment. I get that. But there is at least elements of, like Deerskin, for example, like how far is a man willing to go after a divorce, I guess, or after leaving his partner to look good. You know what I mean? Like there's this vanity thing to it.
Yeah.
Same with Incredible But True. There's this vanity thing to it, which I think is interesting to explore. Whereas Mandibles, I just went, what if Dumb and Dumber, found a giant fly? And the first thing they go is, let's get it to rob banks. And I was like, yeah, all right. But I'm similar to Kieran. There was many scenes where I did laugh. I just think even for 77 minutes, like it is a full movie, but there are things I would have taken out. I do think the portrayal of Agnes is more than questionable.
It is
And not just the performance, but how she's written as well, and that Greta Thunberg inspiration as
And
well.
it's a weird choice for Adele, who is,
So weird.
At that point was doing all right. 2020, she was...
She's pretty, like won some big awards.
Well, I mean, she was the youngest
That's right.
actress to win the Best Actor award at Cannes.
At Cannes,
Because
for Lewis
her
Warmest
and
Lea
Lea
Seydoux.
Seydoux won the joint award for
Yeah.
Bluest Warmest Colour. So she could have gone anywhere after that, and she went to Mandibles.
She has done a lot of other. I've seen her in a bit of stuff.
Yeah.
She has done a lot of good stuff. That's what. When she turned up on screen, I'm like, what is going on? How did you choose this film and then that character? Like,
Quentin Dupieux is just such a nice guy.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe that's the case.
True.
But we've, I
Like
think we've
most things
spent...
in my life, I just blame the French.
I think we've spent more time on Mandibles than it deserved.
Than we thought.
We've
We've almost spent as
than we
long as the
thought.
film.
That's it. Yeah. Actually, we'll just hang around for another 30 odd minutes and that'll be done. But that is Mandibles. France done. My pick done and dusted for another episode, which means we are now back to our Academy Award series, our Oscar series, and we are going to the same year that the film
is
came
the
out,
same year.
2020.
Yeah.
Returning
The
to
big year.
two of our favourites of the show, two people that we love, which is writer-director Thomas Vinterberg and actor Mads Mikkelsen.
We took some real convincing to do this.
This
one.
was a tough
that's
one
right,
to
that's
really
right.
know.
Yeah.
There was at least 13 seconds of deliberation before we went, yeah, that's a good idea. To talk
Because
about...
that was our best rated film, wasn't it? On The Hunt.
The Hunt
Did we all
was
give
one
that
of the
5
highest.
stars?
Yeah, we all gave it
Yeah, I gave it a 5.
5,
Yeah.
5, 5. Yeah, so...
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
to say that we're fans of Thomas Vinterberg and Mads Mikkelsen,
Yeah.
when we dedicated a whole month to
Month
Mads
to
as
Mads.
well. For their international film award-winning Oscar, great sentence structure, Mandibles made me dumb, film Another Round, the 2021 Best International Film Oscar winner. So we're excited to do that for the next episode. But before we leave, we must also find out then what Josh's pick
back
will
to
be.
me.
Back to where it
me.
all began. So after another round, Josh, where will we be going and what will we watch?
Well, yes, because I thought about, obviously, I've said this before, hardest decision in my life at the moment is when it comes round to my pick.
This show is really causing Josh a lot of stress.
Every 3 months,
He's
I'm
a
like,
nervous wreck. He can't sleep. The
He's
night
trying to
before
start a
recording.
union so he can get therapy and stuff just with it. Yeah, it's mental.
But,
So much stuff happening behind the scenes.
I did want to go to a new country.
Yes, that's exciting.
Because I mean, I'm like, these French films, these German films.
Spanish
I want to.
films.
So we're going to go to Hungary.
Oh,
Ooh.
Yeah.
not just what I am. Sorry, that's a fucking terrible joke. If you guys don't want me to come back next week, I get it.
You may or may not have heard of it. It was, I think originally it was like a Netflix release.
Oh,
But it's no longer on Netflix, so I'm not sure how
Brilliant.
that works.
great.
It's called On Body and Soul.
On Body and Soul.
Never heard of
Never
it.
heard of it.
It's 2017,
Okay.
Hungary.
Sorry?
Directed by or starring anyone that we're familiar with?
No, it's going to
Excellent.
be
Great.
it's going to be
Great.
like a
Have you
clean
seen this
slate.
one before?
I've seen it before.
Okay.
Yeah. I remember it being a bit weird.
Yep.
The summary is when slaughterhouse workers Andre and Maria discover they share the same dreams. Where they meet in a forest as a deer and fall in love, they decide to make their dreams come true, but it's difficult in real life.
Wow.
I'm in. Let's go.
Yeah.
Nominated for Best Foreign Language
Yes,
Film
it
as
was.
well, the year
Yeah,
it came out.
was
Okay.
nominated. Yeah. So yeah, that's how we'll go to
Interesting.
Go to Hungary.
Cool. And a country that I like going to countries that people don't
Generally.
immediately think of
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
they think of international cinema,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of those
And I mean-
countries in Europe and like Hungary, so that's going to be a good one.
Always
Excited.
for interesting stories as well. That
Yeah.
sounds
Yeah.
whack.
Yeah.
And no other way to put it. But we've got another round first then on Body and Soul to follow that. In the meantime, thank you for watching and subscribing on YouTube and listening on your preferred podcasting platform. Don't forget that 1 Inch Barrier on Instagram and follow us all on Letterboxd. It'll all be in the description and show notes below. But thank you for joining us for another episode, and we'll see you next month for another round.
Thank you all very much.
The movie and the drink. You can cut that bit out. That's so shit. You can leave that bit in.
Yeah.